Employers, what are your crazy employee stories? I work as a supervisor in a drugstore. One night one of my employees was seen just letting someone walk out with hundreds of dollars of merchandise. A few minutes later he went outside to collect the shopping carts. I was reviewing the video evidence of this happening at the time, and on the phone with my store manager. The employee was outside for a pretty decent amount of time. I hadn't noticed right away because I was busy collecting the evidence, but my other cashier called me up and told me that he still hadn't come back in, 15 minutes later. As I walked downstairs, he came back inside with one shopping cart and the guy was high as a kite. Because I was not a store manager, my hands were rather tied as far as what I could do at the time, so I just sent him home and kept someone else for the rest of the night. The employee called me later. I happened to be best friends with his sister, and he started talking about how he hates snitches and that people should just leave other people alone. He was rambling on and on. The next day the loss prevention manager was there, as well as my manager. The employee was terminated. It turned out that he would let his friends walk out with baskets of merchandise without scanning it. Then he would go to collect carts and they would give him meth in payment for all the stuff. He thought he had this master plan, and that he was sticking it to the man. It was really sad to see. Since then, the employee has been incarcerated and successfully completed rehab. I am glad to say that he is doing so much better now, and has apologized profusely about the entire incident. Worked at a new Fry's that opened in my old town a number of years back. It was pretty bad initially and they really overworked employees. The turnover was huge and later a suit was filed against this specific Fry's. In any case, when I started there was a blonde woman whose name I forget now, let's call her Beth. Beth was overly enthusiastic to the point of being incredibly annoying to any and every employee and customer. Beth was apparently also a pathological liar and frequently left her shifts early to do God knows what. When she was fired, she came back with a nice, purple present. All wrapped up with a white bow and everything. It was meant to be an apology to the manager, but she quickly dropped it off and took off saying she was busy. It smelled like it had been doused in a gallon of perfume, but she seemed half crazed, so whatever. The manager for her department at the time took it and opened it near the registers. Inside was a lump of shit. She had pooped in a box and gave it to her manager. As a gift, of course. We own a salvage yard, junkyard, and we usually have a few cats around. Every now and then one of these cats will claim us and live in the office. We feed it, take it to the vet, and it becomes our junkyard pet cat. One particular cat was awesome and all the guys loved this cat, even the burly guys. They would all share their lunches with the cat. This one guy that used to work for us was a real jerk. One day he decided that he didn't like the cat anymore. He took a can of spray paint and painted the poor kitty. All over, head to tail. When the cat came into the office, my husband, who is the boss, went ballistic. The first thing my husband did was wash the cat off as best as he could. Then he went into the shop and raised holy hell, screaming at everyone until a new guy finally told him that he saw Jim spray paint the cat. My husband was raging and wanted to really mess this guy up badly but instead, called the cops and filed animal cruelty charges and fired him on the spot. This guy had the balls to file for unemployment for unlawful termination. He was denied several times but kept opposing the judgment. We fought his argument all the way to the highest level of state review, where he was granted full unemployment benefits. The reason was, even though he broke the law while at work, it didn't state in our handbook, no spray painting of cats or no unlawful activities at the workplace. We thought that would have been a given. The guy finally got his, though, kind of. He's serving a year in jail for fleeing from the police while drunk. The cat lived for several more years. One guy would always come in on Sunday to feed her and he found her dead. She had died in her sleep, in the box filled with blankets that they kept for her. Bob, not his real name, oh God. Bob lasted 2 weeks, which was about 2 weeks longer than he should have. During orientation, he challenged me on several of our rules, many of them having to do with health and safety. He did not want to wear eye protection or closed-toed shoes since it was too hot in our climate-controlled manufacturing plant. He wore a Bluetooth headset which he proceeded to answer several times during orientation, and when informed that personal cell phone use was only permitted during scheduled breaks, he informed me that he was conducting business and needed it. This was when I decided Bob needed to go. However, HR and the company president also needed to sign off on it, and after 3 hours, they decided I had not given him a fair shake. Bob was untrainable. He had one job to do. balance material in a centrifuge and make sure it was draining. We had charts posted outlining how many of what to put in and how to arrange things. So after working with him for a day, showing him and overseeing him arrange and balance, I was satisfied that I could leave him unattended for 5 minutes while I grabbed a washroom break. I was dead wrong. I started to hear the clanking of metal on metal and ran back to shut down the machine to find that it was not loaded or balanced properly. When asked why he loaded it against regulation, he said, "It takes too long to arrange everything." Still, nobody wanted to get rid of him except me. So as the GM of a manufacturing plant, I spent the next week with Bob, babysitting him as he loaded a centrifuge until I finally had to leave him to do my actual job. In less than half an hour, from improper loading, he had damaged the machine. While I was setting up the backup, I instructed him to go to the board room to review the loading charts and that I would call him back when I was finished. About 20 minutes later, I went to the board room. No Bob. There was nobody in the men's room. As I was walking back to my production floor, I noticed that there was somebody in the president's office. This was pretty strange since the president was out of the office that day and the only two people who were permitted in the office were the office manager and I. Wouldn't you know it, just down the hall, the office manager was happily chugging away at some reports in her office. So I went in, only to find Bob watching some of the most depraved explicit videos on the president's computer. While I didn't have the power to, I terminated him on the spot and cleared it with HR and the president later, who, after a quick viewing of his browser history, agreed that it was justified. Apparently, he didn't know how to browse incognito. Bob has since filed a case with HRSDC for wrongful dismissal. I was a supervisor for a high-end retail store that we were preparing for its grand opening. We had hired one guy, we'll call him Tom, who was in his early to mid-20s. Over the course of a couple of weeks, I noticed that I barely ever saw Tom during his shifts after I sent him off to do something. One day, I sent him onto the sales floor with a cart of merchandise to stock and realized that it had been over 20 minutes and all of the other employees had already been back 2 or 3 times. I was the only manager on, so I knew he hadn't been sent to another task, and I asked if anyone had seen him. One girl turned to me and said, "He's probably in his cubby," and then proceeded to show me where it was. Apparently, Tom had created a cubby for himself about 3 to 4 feet wide behind some old shelving units. He had stolen a heated blanket, a pillow, and various food items off the sales floor, and that's where he had been hanging out for the majority of his shifts for over a month, checking in with various managers at 30 to 45-minute intervals so as to be seen by someone. This was his 3rd or 4th offense, so we fired him. He proceeded to rip his shirt in half and start crying while screaming, "Why?" over and over again at the top of his lungs. We then escorted him out of the building, where he continued screaming and crying while beating his chest and hawking loogies on our windows. This kid was a complete tool. He harassed all of the girls relentlessly, even me, his supervisor, tried to sell drugs on the premises, and stole non-stop. I don't know why he seriously didn't understand why he was being fired. I worked for a big company years ago as the shipping manager. One of the guys I hired was an ex-Russian army guy. He was pretty good, a hard worker and all that. Still a little off, if you know what I mean. So one day he didn't show up and there was no phone call. The next day he called me and he sounded like he was high. He was in the hospital. After work I went by the hospital, we were kinda friends, and his whole right side was black as night. Not a stitch of white. Serious bruising. I asked him what the hell happened and he told me that he and his friends were having a party in his 5th-floor apartment. He was having an argument with one of his friends, as seemed to be a regular Russian thing for them to do. His friend was saying that he never follows through or something like that. So my friend stated that he always follows through. My friend said, "If I told you I would jump out that window, I would." His friend said, "You wouldn't dare." So freaking Yuri ran and leaped out the window, down onto the parking lot below. He spent over a month in the hospital to prove a point. Freaking ridiculous. He quit and I didn't see or hear from him until a year later when he called me on the phone, all drunk, telling me I was Jesus. I was working at Git Fiddle Center right out of high school. The turnover rate at a store like that was pretty high. If I remember correctly, I saw 70 new hires in the 2 years I worked there. One guy we hired lasted less than a day. He was introduced to everyone, but on that day, every register was occupied. So he was sent into our warehouse to help them do stocking and to learn the computer system. However, as I found out later, it was pretty evident that he was at the very least functionally illiterate. So the warehouse manager gave the guy an X-Acto knife and had him go bust down cardboard boxes. However, after about an hour or so, he couldn't be found. I didn't directly witness the events that followed, I was just told about them after the fact. After searching for this man for a while, he was discovered sitting in a pile of gig bags at the top of one of the warehouse shelves, about 15 feet off the ground, singing softly to himself, smiling broadly, with tears on his face, and harming himself with the knife. From where I was, all I knew was that the general manager and a couple of the assistant managers got paged to the warehouse, and soon after we heard sirens in our parking lot. The general manager, a guy with a bit of a temper, was heard yelling very loudly in his office right afterward, though I don't know who he was yelling at. I never saw that kid again. I work in video games. These stories happened many years ago when working in video games was one step lower on the embarrassment to your parents scale than being a roadie. When I started at the company, we were independent and small. The company grew much bigger and got bought by a larger company, but back then it was staffed by anyone they could find that would be willing to move to that location, knew something about the game we were working on, and had a modicum of customer service experience. Keep in mind that we had former Starbucks baristas, guys who worked at 7-Eleven, and a guy that gave us good service at Denny's once. We'd take anyone that had a reasonable attitude and a willingness to work. The industry is different now, but these are a few stories. Some of them have changed in shape over the years, but I'll try to be as true to reality as possible. The game we worked on was an MMO. This particular employee received his job as recompense for turning in a particularly heinous dupe bug. Dupe bugs in MMOs can ruin the entire economy rapidly, and this guy turned it in. The customer service manager hired him but did not really vet the guy. A couple of weeks into the guy's employment, we found that his work ethic was incredible. The guy was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. We found out that he was not actually leaving but sleeping under his desk. We had to make a rule that you had to go home after your shift. I also had someone who, when fired, dropped his pants in the middle of the customer service pit and pooped on the floor. Clean up, aisle 3. But the best story of that entire experience was the keymaster. This is a guy who had moved out from the East Coast to work at this company. He had a girlfriend who moved with him, maybe they met there, I can't quite remember, and there was something not quite balanced about him. But he wanted to work there so badly and worked really hard to get a job. So we started him out on phones instead of as a GM, game master, not general manager. He did reasonably well until one day his lead discovered that he'd been creating in-game money and using it, effectively, to pay his rent. His landlord played the game he worked on, and every action a GM takes is logged, and it was discovered that he had been, in effect, cheating. He got called into the customer service manager's office, a man who, then, was not known for his warm and fuzzy personality, although now, he's mellowed out a lot. When he was confronted with the evidence of his wrongdoing, the guy began to hyperventilate and rock back and forth in his chair. He worked himself up into a frenzy and smashed his head back against the wall in his rocking fit. Unfortunately, there was a whiteboard behind him and the marker ledge was at just the right height, so as he smashed back, it split the back of his head open and a spray of red shot up the wall. The customer service manager, taken aback, told him to calm down and mellow out. Over the next few minutes, the guy ended up jumping up and throwing himself to the ground and beating his head against the ground, muttering to himself about how stupid he had been and begging for his job. Someone went to call the cops, and the guy started to calm down a bit. He was informed he had to leave. The guy got his keys out of his pocket, looking as though he was preparing to leave. He affixed them in his fist with a key poking between his fingers and then began to stab himself in the chest with every ounce of strength he had, with the key. The customer service manager prepared to physically restrain him until the cops arrived, but the guy started to calm himself before throwing the keys at one of the leads who was also present, narrowly missing his face. Long story short, the guy left and ended up moving back east. And the game got a new NPC, the key master. To this day, many of us keep keys in our office next to our monitors, just in case we get fired. It was an amazing place to work. Many of the people from those days have gone on to leadership positions at some of the top game companies in the world. It was trial by fire, and most people got burned, but the ones that didn't have really gone on to some great things. I miss that company some days, and then I remember that the fire really sucked. We once had someone who stole an entire computer, one part at a time. Like, you'd show up to work and your computer was super slow and it would turn out one of the sticks of RAM in your computer was gone, or a keyboard, or a video card. Like, stuff you would notice. His roommate found the parts all under the sink in the bathroom and turned him in. The roommate was part of the internal security team. It was a crazy place. I'm surprised they didn't just fire us all for spite. In my particular case, I'm on the opposite side of the fence on this one. When I was 16, all I wanted was a sport bike. I thought they were straight up the coolest thing ever. Going Mach 5 on one wheel was all I could think about. Of course, I was broke, so I needed a job. Bring on Albertsons. For those of you who don't know, Albertsons is like a grocery store chain. Anyway, 3 days into my job, they put me on customer service, a job that is only supposed to be for people who are 21 and up. A big mistake on their part. Here's another kicker. They didn't train me on anything. I barely knew how to work their crappy computer system, and even with that, I had no idea how their policies on returns worked. Anyway, a few hours went by and I hadn't burned down the building and there were no customers in an uproar yet, so things were looking good. In comes old jerk Gary. Gary wanted to return to Albertsons a pair of New Balance shoes that looked like they were 25 years old and had been worn every day since their creation. Now, I'm no grocery store guru, but I knew for a fact we didn't sell shoes at this particular location. So I politely informed the guest that he might be in the wrong store. I was thinking maybe this guy was senile or something. He got insanely furious that I wouldn't accept the return of his product and demanded to see my manager. I internally laughed, thinking this was going to be good. So my manager, a very sweet Hispanic lady, came out and got the situation. She looked at me like I had just approved the launch codes for a nuclear strike on an orphanage full of kittens. I was a little stunned at her reaction, and she promptly gave the man a card that was good for $45 store credit and accepted the shoes. She turned to me and basically chewed me out and said that it was their policy to accept all returns if the customer was unsatisfied, apparently even for things we don't even sell. What the heck? So over the next week or so, I started accepting all sorts of returns. Most of them were regular returns, but once or twice a week I got some freaking ridiculous return by some customer with a smug grin on their face because they knew they were just working our ridiculous system. Honestly, if some jerk tried to return his car, I'd do it. I would freaking do it. People would return giant hams that they forgot and left in their car in the 2000-degree Florida heat for a week and ask for a return for a brand new one. Sure enough, I was forced to give them one. Then I started noticing a pattern. It was roughly the same 8 or 9 people I saw effectively returning miscellaneous stuff they probably found in their garage just before heading out to Albertsons so they could fund their groceries for the week. I eventually snapped when some guy tried to return hardware tools, and because he had the audacity to complain that I wasn't giving him the amount he paid for, I lost it. I demanded he show me where in this godforsaken establishment we sold even one single tool. He seemed stunned and eventually got my manager. I quit. About 3 or 4 months later, Albertsons went out of business. Go freaking figure. The only time I've quit my job, or was about to get fired anyway. Here's a couple. I was training at a gas station. The first hour was the normal rush, and everything went normally. When the crowd died down, we started to settle in and I started going through the normal routine with him. As we were talking, he pulled out a knife that was several inches over the legal limit and a stone, and started sharpening the knife. I immediately said, "You need to put that back in your car now and never bring it to work with you again. Carrying a concealed and illegal weapon is grounds for immediate termination if security or management sees that." His response: "Oh, okay." He started walking to his car, presumably to drop the knife off. And then he drove away, never to be seen again. At my current job, we had 2 back-to-back. The first person we hired appeared to be a godsend. She was very comfortable around computers and by day 2 was already well on her way to having her own routine for the day mapped out. She was picking up on her job far faster than anyone in recent memory. Then her boyfriend called the school she was assigned to. Who the heck is manager's name? Why the heck is his name in my woman's phone? Don't give me that bull that she's not available. Put her on the phone now or I'll go down there and drag her ass out. This caused the lockdown of the school, for obvious reasons. She was called into the admin building and asked to give information on her boyfriend, since authorities were interested in pressing charges. Her response was totally nonchalant. "Oh, don't mind him, he gets like that from time to time. Just don't press charges, please. If he violates his parole again, he'll be back in jail." She was immediately fired. I don't know if they ended up pressing charges against the boyfriend. So then we were on the hunt for a replacement for her. Her replacement was a middle-aged woman, spoke English and Spanish. Her attire appeared to be a mixture of religious and cultural garb, nothing extravagant but a bit over the top. She was a deeply religious woman but didn't appear to let that spill into her work. At least not on the first day, anyway. The school manager was out on the second day for a personal day. She came back to find almost everything in her office thrown into boxes, stuffed into a closet, and replaced with various religious pictures, trinkets, statuettes, etc. The office looked like the Vatican. So she went and looked for the new hire, who was found in a faculty bathroom sobbing, "Only God can help me now." She had to be taken away by local police. I don't know what happened to her, either. I once had this quirky guy working for me. He was a strange hippie dude, but he did decent work. He called me one morning saying he was going to be late. There was a whole lot of commotion and yelling in the background, and then he hung up. I work in construction and some of us blue-collar guys have other stuff going on in life, so I give the benefit of the doubt as long as you are usually here, on time, sober, and not asking for your check early every week. Anyway, about 2 hours later he showed up and had scratches on his face and arms. I didn't look anywhere else. I said, "What the heck happened to you? Did you and the old lady get into it or something?" He then proceeded to tell me how he was peacefully sleeping and his cat brought him a present. A squirrel. Mind you, apparently this squirrel wasn't quite dead when the feline dropped it on his bed. So, apparently, this half-dead creature came out of its death trance, tore him up pretty badly, and was tearing around the room when he called me. I was laughing so hard the whole way while driving him to the hospital. I've never seen such a pitiful sight. I could only imagine him running around his bedroom in his tighty-whities with his long, balding, frizzy hair flowing in the wind, trying to catch this mortified, half-dead squirrel after it had clawed him up while his wife was shrieking in the background. Even now, just typing this has got me in tears. Maybe you just had to be there.